Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I want to talk about the giant controversy going on at CGC that may spell the end of comic collecting. Alright, it probably won't, but it's a pretty big deal. It's maybe, probably, almost certainly the biggest controversy that CGC has faced in the 20 years it's been around. Seriously threatens to undermine not just the CGC as a company, but grading as a whole, and could have some significant impact on our hobby. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Um, just a quick recap for those of you who may not be aware of what's going on, which is, I mean, probably most of you heard about this. Everywhere I'm online, all the different forums and Facebook and Instagram, everybody's talking about it. I'm seeing stuff everywhere. But if you're not familiar with what's happened, it's basically this. It was recently discovered that there is a vendor who, for quite a while, has figured out a way to open the CGC cases without being detected. And so what he was doing is he was opening the CGC cases. He was swapping in lower grade copies of books. In several cases, in a lot of cases, he would swap in a lower grade copy of a Mark Jeweller's insert, so a rare variant but at a lower grade. And then he would send the book back to CGC saying, oh, you made a mistake when you graded my book. You forgot to note that it had a Mark Jeweler insert in it. And what was happening was CGC was not catching this, that it was a different book. They were reholding it without regrading them, meaning that the lower grade books were then getting the higher grade. So, for example, he would buy like a CGC 9.8 of some, random Bronze Age book. He'd then get a CGC like 9.0 of the same book, but with a Mark Jeweller's insert. He'd put the Mark Jeweller's book in the 9.8 case, send it back, get it reholdered, but now it would come back as a 9.8 with the Mark Jeweller's note on it. So the lower grade book would be in the higher grade case. And because the Mark Jeweller's in particular are so rare in high grade, a lot of times he would have like one of the highest ones on the census, and they'd sell for record amounts. And that's basically eventually what ended up getting him caught, is because someone saw that this lower grade book was clearly in a higher grade case, and some investigation went on and they figured this out. But it turns out he's been doing this for a while, defrauding people of hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process, and again, doing it in a way that makes CGC look incompetent, if not complicit, because they were not following their own protocol. As far as I can tell, they're supposed to be regrading when they do the reholdering. Most of the time, particularly when they have to check the book anyway to see that it has the Mark Jewelers. But more importantly, they were not catching that the books, that their cases had been tampered with. This is where it becomes a really big deal. So I'm going to get into that in a second. What's happened here is, the first step is CGC is basically they've made a list of all the books that they're aware of where this has happened, which is several hundred books. They've said that they're going to compensate everybody who is known to have been affected by buying one of the fake books, and they said they're working on implementing some changes to the CGC case to ensure that this can't happen again. Those are fine for first steps, but here's where, of course, the big problem is people are now asking, if one guy was able to do this and get this past CGC, surely there are other people that have also figured out how to open the cases and reseal them without it being noticed, which calls into question not just the books that have been, uncovered from this one vendor, but potentially all the books. Now, CGC has graded something like, I forget what, 11 million books over the last 20 years. But if people can open the cases and swap the books out and no one can tell the difference, including CGC themselves, it calls into question the validity of all of the books in CGC cases across the board. And obviously that's a huge problem because the industry, I should say the hobby, has come to rely on CGC. Now, I'll say up front, I've never been a big CGC fan. I've never been any kind of CGC fan. I've been critical of them in the past on some of my videos, but right from the time they were first announced 20 years ago, I mean, it all seemed like a scam to me, like particularly in the early days when they were partnering with Wizard magazine, and Wizard was just doing these bogus hype things, hyping up the value of CGC books over regular books as part of the promotion, and they had a deal between the two companies, and it all just seemed like a bunch of crap. Over the years, I have come to recognize that there is an important role that CGC or a similar grading company plays in the marketplace, specifically because more and more and more back issues are being sold online. So having a third party that can verify the grade of something that you're not able to actually inspect in hand is really important, and has become kind of central to all of the online buying and selling of comics. And that's what's now in danger. There's a lot of people speculating as to what's going to happen here, and I think it's very reasonable to wonder, like, is CGC going to be severely damaged? Is their reputation going to be damaged? If it is, like long term, and this becomes a major issue for CGC going forward with all of their stuff they've ever done called into question, how is that going to affect the value of CGC books? And how is that going to affect online sales when you don't have sort of this primary third-party grading system company? How does that affect other third-party grading companies like, I just blanked on the names of all of them, but all the other ones. Like, there's a lot of valid questions here, and what my gut tells me is that it's going to have a big impact on CGC. It's going to have an impact, short term at least, on sales. It's definitely another huge hit to the confidence people have in CGC, probably the biggest ever. I don't think it's the end of the industry, and ultimately I don't think it's going to be the end of CGC. I've been pleasantly surprised by how much traction this is getting in the community, because my immediate instinct was not enough people are even going to be paying enough attention to this to make it into a big problem. Like, it's going to be a huge problem for those of us who know about it, but I thought initially that the general collecting public probably wouldn't even really know about it or care that much about it, and it was going to be business as usual. The more stuff I see online with other people talking about it, the more I think it is going to be a bigger problem than that. But ultimately, I think it's not going to be the end of CGC. I think, they'll have to make some changes, but I don't think it's, going to be a death knell or anything to their company, in part because there aren't really any big, respected, viable alternatives. But I can see it giving a hit to the value of a CGC book in contrast to the value of non-CGC book. There's always been this premium, and again, a large part of it is driven by the fact that when you're buying online, you can't inspect the book yourself. And so now that doesn't really matter anymore, because it's not like you can trust that CGC has actually inspected the book either. So while I think there's going to be a certain sort of feeling like, well, it's better than nothing, it doesn't really, or shouldn't at least, carry the sort of weight that it has previously in the past. So I can see potentially the gap in value between a raw book and a CGC book shrinking, as sort of the confidence in CGC has been, I think, irreparably damaged with this. But we've already been seeing a lot of most back issues, coming down in value since they had that crazy spike in 2021 at the height of the pandemic. I think this will probably add more to that. So I think the downward trend with a lot of books sort of market correcting may be accelerated or extended, so we're going to have a longer down period than we may have otherwise. I'm curious to see if anything's going to fill in the gap that's potentially left here for CGC. It's unfortunate that this has happened, but it's also just sort of unfortunate that a lot of the people, there's always been this stereotype about comic book shop owners, being these sort of sleazy wheeler dealers. And, I've talked, there's lots of very reputable dealers who are very honest people with great reputations, but it does feel like there's always this element in collecting comics. And it's just unfortunate that there's no big authority that can be trusted, because all of the people who set themselves up as authorities, like CGC and some of the other grading companies, like PGX in particular, is renowned for being a haven for scammers and thieves. So like the institutions that have cropped up that we're supposed to turn to trust, we can't trust, because like in a lot of cases they're either incompetent or those are the bad guys. And it's really unfortunate that there's nobody like you can really trust in to fill this role. So it's a huge bummer, but I can't say I'm surprised. I don't think it's affected any of my books. Most of the books that I have from CGC I got graded myself, and the other ones they're not really high grade, so they wouldn't make any sense because they're crappy anyway. So it doesn't really affect me, but I'm certainly going to hesitate. They always say buy the book and not the label, but that's hard to do if you're not able to inspect the book because it's sealed in a case. So then it's sort of like, in some cases, you kind of have to, you can only see what you can see. You kind of have to trust the label at least a little bit, or else there's no point to the label. And when you're buying stuff online, you're just sort of at the whim of everybody at this point. So, it is a big sort of, reminder that the best way to buy these is to find reputable dealers that you can trust, build relationships with them, and buy their comics in person so you can inspect them yourselves. But it calls everything into question. I mean, if CGC there's one of the things they're supposed to be doing is catching restoration, for instance, and now people could easily be swapping restored books into blue labels, and we wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So it just sort of undermines the whole company and the whole idea of the company. So I think it's a big blow for the hobby. I don't think it's the end, but it's definitely bad. And I've already said in one of my previous videos where I was bashing CGC that I'm not going to be sending anything to CGC, and this just reiterates that, particularly right now where we don't even know yet what they're doing to fix it. So that was just sort of my rambly thoughts about this. Let me know what you think down below about this whole controversy and about the current state of CGC, and I'll see you next time.